Every indicator you look at, everything is coming down, literally across the board in Canada and the United States.
I don't think that the Fed and necessarily any real central bank can maintain high interest rates. It just, the economy can't support it.
We're also increasing inflation through all of these money printing programs and the suppression of interest rates, and 80 to 90% of the world is kind of in the same boat.
Do you have financial insurance? I'm sure you have life insurance, car insurance, and home insurance, but do you have financial insurance? With recent bank failures, inflation at 40-year highs, and the onset of World War III, there has never been a more important time to invest into precious metals.
Click the link below to book a consultation with myself or any of our precious metals experts. Hey Helen, how are you?
Hey, Mike, good and you?
Good to see you again. Helen, how do you pronounce your last name? Viljoen?
It's spelled, well, pronounced Viljoen.
Viljoen?
It's, yeah, it's Afrikaans, and the V is pronounced like an F,
Okay.
and the J is like a Y.
All right. Helen, you are the founder and CEO of Nebu Gold. Please tell us a little bit I'm really excited to talk to you today. I think your business model and the concept of your business is really, really cool. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. If you can get into a little bit of background of Nebu Gold and how you got started into your business and where you're at today.
Yeah, no, it's great to be on your podcast, Mike, and thanks for the invite. I think I started Nebu in 2019, November of 2019, right before COVID. So that was an amazing time to start a business.
Mhm.
And it took us about a year and a half to sort of gain traction in the market. But the idea behind the business was that I've always been interested in gold, and wearable gold wasn't really something in the market at the time. So, I mean, gold is money. Bullion is, when you think of bullion, you think of bars and coins. And I wanted to create something that had a little bit more utility to it, and also sort of incorporated beauty into the product. And I think, as a woman, women love fine jewelry and diamonds and that type of thing. And when I investigated the market, fine jewelry is predominantly, the intrinsic value of the product is not really very high. So, you're paying, say $1,000 for a ring or whatever, upward of that. But the actual intrinsic value of that is probably $100. So if you're doing well, you're retaining about 10 to 20% of your purchase price. And I just thought that that was really, the customers and the consumer didn't know that. And we wanted to sort of flip that ratio on its head, where you could wear something that was beautiful, and intrinsically valuable, and actually retained about 80% of its purchase price, coupled with the best elements of bullion, where bullion is obviously an incredible store of value. It's a 6,000-year old technology that has been used by people as a store of value throughout the ages. And but mostly, when you're holding physical product, it's held in vaults. And, we wanted to combine the two, the best of both worlds, and put those together in a product. So that's pretty much the inspiration behind Nebu, and why I started it. Just for basically for people to have a physical store of value that tracks the gold price, and something that they can wear and enjoy while it's growing for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think the one issue now with people buying gold and silver is, like you said, it's sitting in vaults. There's really no, you're not able to, I guess, show it off or like a new car would, or a new piece of jewelry, like you guys are doing. I think it's an amazing concept. And tell me about the experience so far in terms of how much growth you're seeing and the interest you're seeing in this market. You're in South Africa, is that correct?
So we're currently based in South Africa. At least our back office and our manufacturing team is. So we produce in South Africa, um, but we mainly sell in the United States, Canada, and Europe. We're seeing incredible growth in this sector. I mean, I bootstrapped the company, I grew it organically. So we've taken, 3 years to get to where we are at the moment. But every year we're growing, quarter on quarter. Last quarter, we grew about 450% in terms of metal weight sold.
Amazing.
And I think, people are, especially, it's such an interesting time to be in gold from a global economic standpoint. I mean, gold has seen incredible highs this year. I think we have sort of the instability in the geopolitical space to thank for that, as well as the financial system and the monetary policies at the moment. I think as I said, we've grown organically, and as our name gets out there, and we sort of have a really good returning customer base and really loyal customers. We distribute through some of the biggest bullion dealers in the United States at the moment. And I think that, coupled with, the name of your podcast being The Gold Awakening, I think couldn't be more apt at this stage in the market, because I think the market is really awakening to what gold actually is, which is money and a store of value. And it's gotten some real airtime in the last couple of months.
And jewelry.
Yeah,
Of course.
no,
So
exactly.
so are you at like 90% women? What percent of your buyers? Well, obviously you're dealing directly with the bullion manufacturers or wholesalers or retailers. So I guess you might not even have insight. Well, you would know what products you're selling. I guess, are all of your products female? Do you also have products for men as well?
Oh yes, so we distribute. We partner with many bullion dealers, but we also sell directly to the market. And
Okay.
what we're seeing in our demographics and sort of cohort split is, I would say, predominantly maybe more men, but close to a 50 60/40 split. Um, so, I mean, which has been quite surprising to us. When you start a jewelry company, you immediately think either it's going to be men buying gifts for women or for some, a significant other, or women buying for themselves. And what we've seen is a lot of women who have moved away from traditional gold investment and are sort of taking a stacking approach with our products. And then men that are the products and the designs that they're buying are for themselves. So I would say it's a pretty equal distribution between the two.
That is surprising. I'm not gonna lie,
Mm.
because the first thing I thought when I started seeing your product is, I mean, it's beautiful. Your product is really. Are you involved in the design process of all this as well? Where do all these designs come from? Because I think you guys have really, the bracelets specifically, I think are beautiful. So are you involved in the design process as well?
Yeah, I think in the early stages of the company, when you would know when you found a company, you're kind of touching all aspects of the company. And I think that really gives you a great sort of grasp of what is required in each department. So I was a lot more involved in the designs in the beginning, but I still have oversight of all the designs and idea generation at this point. And I think we've really tried to we try and listen to the market. I think the most important thing, especially as a creative company, and what I've experienced in the creative space, is that designers sometimes go a little bit. They focus very much on their creation and their art, and it's not. I guess it's subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we wanted to very much create, given that the intrinsic principle of the product is to create value for our customer base, to ensure that they have as much bang for their buck and value in their or intrinsic value in their product. It's also designed around things that we get feedback from the market on. So we've kept the designs relatively classic, or tried to keep it as timeless as possible, and really listen to our customer base and what they want.
So Nebu Gold is the name of the company. What's the website again? Is it nebugold.com?
Yeah.
Nebugold.com. Okay, awesome. Yeah, because it's really I still haven't been able to go through the entire site. It's surprising how many products you guys actually have already in just a few short years. So congratulations on that.
Thank
But
you.
what got you in the space? I mean, what made you kind of go down this rabbit hole of the gold being money and understanding the issues of our monetary policy around the world? Is it from living in South Africa? Is it the work you were involved in? What kind of got you to where you're at now in terms of making jewelry more of a bullion product versus a high margin product?
That's a great question, Mike. So I think my journey with gold started quite a long time ago. My husband was in gold mining in South Africa, and so that was sort of my first exposure to gold. Um, sort of basically at the coalface. And I then took a trip to Singapore in 2018. And it was really fascinating in the East. There are jewelry companies there. Yes, you have precious stones and fine jewelry, very similar to what you see in the West. But they had this really interesting concept with jewelry that was sold by weight. So effectively sold as bullion, um, where you would have a piece that they would weigh it out at the prevailing gold price, and then there would be a maker's fee. It was quite a complicated model, because depending, like literally every single design would have a different maker's fee. Um, and I thought that was really interesting. And that's when I came back and then grew, sort of developed the idea, predominantly servicing the appetite and the taste for the West. But I think gold as a as an asset itself, um, I've always find, I mean, if you're interested in politics, history, and economics, I really can't think of a better medium to sort of weave all three of those fields together than gold. I think, obviously, being in South Africa basically being built on gold. I mean, we still have some of the most unmined deposits um, in the world at the moment, and have produced a significant amount of the world's gold. Um, Gold really just has an incredible history to it. And I think, obviously, as a woman, gold really plays an incredible role in female financial emancipation. I don't know if you know, but they say that I think like something like a third of the world's gold is worn by Indian women,
Wow.
and yeah, which is incredible. I mean, um, and how gold actually worked in India in terms of the sort of a female um, empowerment and emancipation um, tool was women weren't allowed to have bank accounts without their husband's permission. So they were pretty financially controlled, and um, basically the only way that they were allowed to own jewelry. And that sort of, I think there are many source stories of jewelry and gold being worn as a mobile sort of investment. But Indian women particularly, it was sort of a, I guess, what would you call I don't know what it is in English, but basically they would pool all their gold jewelry together, and collateralize it, and that would be how they could, develop and empower their communities. Um, so yeah, in Afrikaans, I think it's called a stokvel, which is basically like a community investment. So you see these stories throughout history. I mean, if you take gold back to its early days, I think the first gold coins were minted in Lydia in like 600 BC. And you look historically at gold, a lot of it was before it was an actual medium of exchange. Gold was a store of value, but in jewelry forms. So you would see sort of necklaces where you could break off pieces and use it to trade. And that was predominantly because jewelry, society back then was pretty unstable, and people, there weren't such, there were no such things as security or safety deposit boxes or vaults. You kept your wealth on you, and if you needed to flee, you needed to be able to carry it with you. And that was obviously a really easy medium to store your wealth and protect yourself. um, so I think, that sort of is the history behind gold, and why I found it so interesting. And I think obviously in the modern times, monetary policy, geopolitics have always been. I actually have a legal background by qualification, and if you look throughout history and the current geopolitical environment and what's happening with money printing and sort of inflation and that type of thing, like it's really interesting to see how the interplay with gold.
How is inflation out in South Africa? I mean, obviously here in Canada, just recently we saw 40-year high inflation. The story now is that they inflation's more under control. They throw out numbers like 2 to 3%, which, I mean, we all know that people that live in Canada, that's ridiculous, and we're well
Yeah.
north of, probably north of 20%. So how is the inflation out where you live currently, and what are your thoughts about future inflation as well?
Mike, I think the same narrative is peddled by all governments throughout the world, that their official numbers are super low, but you just have to go into a grocery store and monitor the price of eggs and bread to know that that is just not true. Um, our inflation, we were joking about it in the office the other day that, every 2 weeks you go and you buy a loaf of bread and it's gone up by a rand. Or 2 rand, and which is a significant percentage. So I would say our inflation in real terms is probably around 20-25% at the moment. Even though our CPI is, I think it's like 5%.
Wow.
And that's the problem. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but at the moment, our unemployment rate is significantly high. I mean, South Africa is up a certain creek without a paddle at the moment, with no real uh, change or there's no change in the narrative. We recently had our elections, so we're looking forward to an interesting 4 years. Um, but yeah, I mean, inflation is really outrunning, and no one's salaries are keeping up with inflation here.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think the big disconnect nowadays with maybe prior years of inflation is we're not really seeing the economy growing at all. Usually you see some growth that goes along with inflation, but the reality is we're seeing every indicator, economic indicator that you look at, we're seeing a slowdown. Unemployment's going up, um,
Hmm.
jobs are going down, new jobs are going down. Just even manufacturing, every indicator you look at, new homes, construction, and overall, everything is coming down, literally across the board in Canada and the United States. Globally, I'm sure probably at least 80 to 90% of the world is kind of in the same boat. Um, the problem is we're also increasing inflation through
Hmm.
all of these money printing programs and the suppression of interest rates. And the Fed today is going to be announcing, I think at 2 o'clock or
Mm.
2:30, um, another rate reduction will probably be either a quarter point or even a half a point. And every indicator out there is saying that this is going to continue for the next 12 to 18 months, where interest rates are going to come down to close to 2% in North America. And this sounds like the whole world is kind of on this path of currency devaluation and higher inflation. And the reality is, not too many people are very positive about the impact that it's going to create from an economic standpoint. Even if there is some type of stimulus that comes from this, it's definitely going to be short-term stimulus. It's not going to be. It's not nothing that they're doing now is going to work long-term to help our economy. And I guess all this is really telling me is
where people need to put their money currently to survive this inflation and the slowdown in the economies. Because a lot of things have, like, nobody's really saying we're in a recession yet or a depression, but the reality is, I think we all know that we're already in that. It's now you
Yeah.
can argue whether you think you're in a recession or a depression. The cost of living, in my opinion, just looking at numbers, even going back to the early 1900s, the cost of living today is worse than it's ever been. So you
Yeah.
could easily argue that we're in a depression today in most parts of the world, just based off of how difficult it is to pay for the day to day necessities. So for me, that's the main reason I'm so passionate about gold and silver and
Yeah.
cryptocurrencies as well. Just these are, in my opinion, ways that you can combat that inflation. You need to be in real tangible assets that go
Hmm.
up in price with inflation. And historically speaking, gold, silver, and now the new asset of cryptocurrencies seem to be the best hedges. What are your thoughts in terms of where, obviously, gold is a big part of your business, but where do you see the biggest opportunities to help people kind of fight off this inflation? Because if you just keep your money in a bank, I mean, you're gonna go down with the ship, right? I mean, where do you see the most opportunity right now?
Mike, I think as gold, as a gold bug and a relatively conservative investor, I've always felt, I've always had a healthy skepticism of what mainstream media and governments tell us. I think maybe more so than in the West, that when you live in South Africa, I mean, we've had, a free country or independence for 30 years. Since apartheid ended. But whether it's the new government, the ANC, or the National Party during apartheid, governments have not been honest with their people, at least in South Africa. I think you'd find maybe there's a bit more accountability in the West, but certainly in Africa, we do not have a good track record of delivering value to and delivering on promises. Maybe that's something that politicians just generally can't do. Um, they have great intentions, but don't quite follow through on the execution. So I think as a gold bug, I've always really liked the fact that with gold, I would say to people, like, get as much exposure to physical gold, not paper gold, physical
Right.
gold. Um, because firstly, I mean, we know as interest rates decrease, generally speaking, gold prices increase. There's sort of an inverted relationship there.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Fed and necessarily any real central bank can maintain high interest rates. It just, the economy can't support it. Um, and I was always, my financial learnings was always, you had a wealth creation, so your business, your job, whatever that may be, and then wealth preservation. And when one's playing, the stock market as well has become quite a casino. You really, most of the stocks, unless you really know your the stock that you're investing in, it's kind of become just pure speculation. Everyone's just riding. There's no, I think my biggest issue with that is there's no substance anymore. Everyone is selling dreams. Everyone is peddling the next, snake oil. And what is actually going to be the lasting asset over time, and specifically over the next 10 years? One has to look at the market environment, the geopolitical movements between, the world powers, um, and what the political policies are. And as you said, you're not seeing any central bank really maintaining, sort of stopping the party. The music is just continuing, and no one really wants to take the medicine. And it's really, really sad for me, because, people, I think, and particularly in the gold space, and that was one of our motivators. Sure, you get your 1 gram bullion bars, and that at least gives people some exposure, although they're sold significantly, they're high above spot. But generally, it's pretty expensive for your average blue collar worker or normal middle class family to have exposure to gold. And I think we wanted to try and give people again that mobility to that investment, as well as products that are light. So we have an extremely large range, and I think from I think our lowest item is like 3 point something grams, right up to 40 grams, and that gives a little bit more access. Other than the design variability, that gives our customers an entry point into something that might be a bit more mainstream, or something that they're used to in form of jewelry, but it also gives them some physical exposure. um, I think, going forward in terms of opportunities, I'm no financial advisor, so I don't want to speak on topics that I'm not qualified to. But as from my personal opinion, I think the next couple of years, getting your hands on as much physical precious metals, gold particularly, is going to stand you in good stead.
If you think your money is safe, think again. Our economy is on the brink of total collapse. Think back to the 2008 financial crisis. Inflation skyrocketing, stocks tumbling, and banks on the verge of collapse. Sound familiar? It's not just history, it's a warning. And ignoring this warning could be the biggest financial mistake of your life. In 2008, gold and silver were by far the best performing assets. That is why now is the time to invest in precious metals. At Can-Am Bullion, you can order both gold and silver directly from our online store. Can-Am is also an authorized dealer with the Royal Canadian Mint, so you can be rest assured that you are dealing with a reputable bullion dealer. Do you really want to wait for an economic collapse? Now is the time to make a smart and informed decision and protect your wealth with gold and silver. Click the link below to book a consultation with myself or any of our precious metals experts.
And you mentioned stocks and how it's very speculative. And I mean, the truth is the PE ratios, which is price earnings ratios, is the highest they've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2008, I think the stock market's been up 15 of the 16 years. I think the only one down year was during COVID, maybe 2 years. But the reality is we're in a major bubble. There's usually the cycle is usually 7 years for stocks, but for whatever reason, we just continue to go higher and higher and higher. So you could see a major crash in the stock market if war escalates. If there's so many different events that can happen that really, if you actually admit to a recession, which I'm assuming is inevitable at some point in 2025, later in 2025, but I would assume at some point people will be admitting that we're in a recession. So I mean, yeah, I just don't see stocks. And another point I'd like to mention is the Dow Jones gold ratio. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but right now the Dow Jones is around 17 times more expensive than gold. And the reality is, throughout history, it always comes back to a 1-to-1 ratio, which currently means gold has about 1,700% more upside potential than the Dow Jones if you're going to compare those two assets. So the reality is, either the Dow Jones has to come down to a level that, and gold has to go up to a certain level. Maybe that's $10,000 is kind of where I think the Dow Jones will come down to, and where gold will go up to, and we get to that 1-to-1 ratio. So for that reason, I mean, the opportunity to me seems very obvious. If you go even from a historical perspective, people look at gold right now and they see it's at an all-time high, but the reality is you got to compare it to other asset classes, such as stocks and real estate. And the reality is gold has not kept up with either of those asset classes since 1980. Real estate and stocks have been the best performing assets. And I don't think that trend is going to continue going forward. I think commodities is where it's at. And I think we're about to enter a commodity bull market that we probably haven't seen in quite some time. And the same token, I think you're also going to see a lot of potential downside pressure in stocks and bonds and real estate. Are you kind of in the same mindset in terms of your lack of upside opportunity in some of these traditional assets that I spoke about?
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page with you, Mike. I think, if you look at the psychology behind investing these days, I think with technology booms and your new generation coming through, where there's just, I mean, instant gratification is an all-time high with Gen Zs. People want to get wealthy overnight, and the easiest way, or what seems to be the easiest way, is to, go to the casino and gamble on the stock market. And most sort of, casual investors don't actually understand what is going on the stock market, and how that's working. And I think you and I both know, as founders of companies, that the boards of those companies, they care they're not exactly looking at paying out dividends to the public investor. They are, I mean, in my brief phase when we were exposed to some very large publicly listed mines, decisions are not made for the benefit of the commercial or the investor on the street. You kind of are last in line. And I think, it's sad because people are trying to find ways to improve their income and to just grow their money a bit, but they're going to get hurt. I mean, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked, and I think there's going to be a lot of naked swimmers in the bay soon. I think, and it ties in with money printing. I mean, when there's money printing into the market, your financial instruments are, or at least your stocks and your equities, are often the ones that are pumped up first. So there's 100% a bubble. And I think, the next decade is going to be really interesting, as you mentioned, war-wise, as there's more social pressures. Society cannot keep up with it. And I mean, I read an article the other day that said, gold has outperformed the S&P 500 for the 1, 2, and 3 year mark. And, why I say that consumers should be exposed to physical gold. I mean, you'll know with fractional reserve banking, I mean, ETFs to an extent work exactly the same way. You're basically trusting a bank that they are exactly like money when they basically have to hold 10% on reserve, and they can do with your money what you will. And if there's a run on the bank, you're going to get paid out 10% of your ones and zeros. They don't actually have your money. The same thing goes for ETFs. Like,
They don't
they
have
don't have to hold. It's not 100% reserve. So
not
we're all
close.
trusting. You're trusting these banks to, or whoever you're buying the ETF from, that they can that IOU is going to be delivered on. And
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you envision a time where this derivative bubble actually pops and these ETFs go belly up? Do you? I mean, I think it's inevitable, but again, they have a lot more control probably than we even think. So, I mean, is that something you actually expect to happen in the next 10 years, 20 years, or do you think they'll just somehow keep it all together? Let's talk about the reset here. Like, obviously, there's a lot of talk out there regarding this great reset. You got the World Economic Forum talking about it, and it feels like we're at the beginning stages of that reset, and that old monetary system kind of coming crashing down, and having a whole new monetary system, whether it's central bank digital currencies, or whether it's a currency backed by gold or other commodities. What are your thoughts on kind of where the next phase of money is, and how bad do you think this reset is going to be for the middle class?
I think it's going to be horrific for the middle class. I think, through inflation and debasing currencies, I think the middle class's purchasing power is just being eroded at an astronomical rate. I think, I mean, this is where we sort of move into the space, as a gold bug, and a pundit, you tend to be a little bit contrarian, because gold has always lent itself to sort of a decentralized way of thinking. And yeah, I mean, when the ETF bubble is going to burst, I don't know. I do know, I mean, just by pure logic, there is not enough physical gold. I mean, the beauty of why is gold so valuable? Gold is valuable because there's a finite amount on the earth. It is extremely expensive to extract. The easily extractable gold is getting less and less. So technology is going to have to develop significantly. At least I can speak for South Africa. there are so many mines here that have deep level gold that is it's not safe for humans to mine. And that gold will sit there unless the technology is developed. In South Africa, it's a little bit more challenging because you have to fight the government and the red tape that's surrounded mining and mineral rights in general. Um, so that's what inherently makes gold amazing, is that there's a finite source. There's, it's expensive to extract, and it's, obviously its properties being noble, and being having a track record as it does.
And that's
Um,
what the big money's buying, right? The central banks around the world, that they're buying more gold than they've ever bought in history. So I mean, that kind of tells you what they're thinking about the dollar and bonds and what they think of traditional assets, because obviously they're moving into what they believe is a strong asset, tier one asset that is going to go up in price as inflation continues to skyrocket. So the big money's going into gold.
yeah,
So usually that's when we should be following suit, don't you think?
yeah. I think, they always say, like, when you hear, uh, I guess, Joe Blow down the street talking about the latest stock that he's invested, that's when you need to get out of that stock. And I think this theory applies to central banks. When central banks are flooding into gold, that's when you should be worried. Um, I think, I mean, if you look at the history of gold, like, monetary systems have sort of every about 40 years, more or less, collapsed, and there's been a new system that has been introduced. Whether it was, the gold backed currency, to Bretton Woods, to dollarization, you know, every sort of,
Because
it keeps
we
the
really
cycle
haven't
keeps.
had anything since 1971 is the last one, right? When they went off the gold standard. So we're due for
Yeah,
something.
and I think, that really ties in with economics, in the curriculums. I mean, historically, if you look at central banks and well, countries in particular, if you looked at their balance sheet and their budgets, gold was a line item. What they had in reserve, and now with our monetary system being purely fiat, it it's no longer it's no longer relevant, at least to your average, person, on the street. And gold is not really sort of, it's not taught anymore, so people don't understand it. I mean, what is, if you were to ask your average guy, what does his portfolio look like, the standard response is, no, you need about 10 to 20%, maybe 30% at a stretch, of exposure to gold in the form of ETFs. And the only reason that you do that is for a little bit of portfolio diversification and hedging against inflation. It's not seen as an actual really good, solid asset class that is growing. I mean, gold did incredibly well. Gold's done incredibly well this year, but year on year, I mean, that is, for me, what more do you want out of an asset? Yes, it's not going to give you these extreme highs and extreme lows, but as a store of value, what could more could you ask for? If you have physical gold, you know that that's yours. You don't have any counterparty risk, and you know that that is, chugging along nicely. I mean, they what gold sort of averages out at 13.5% year on year, but I think in the last couple of years, it's definitely exceeded that. Um,
Yeah, and the reality is, it's shocking to me that we're a bullion dealer in Canada, and to see the lack of interest at the retail level is, to me, is shocking. I mean, we're hitting all time highs. There's all this risk in the world, major inflation, but people aren't rushing into gold yet. In North America, only 0.5% of people invest into precious metals. That's including ETFs. So I mean, it's almost non-existent at this point.
mhm.
And when we got to peak gold in 1980, it got up to 5% of people were invested in precious metals. So right now we're at 0.5%. So we need a tenfold increase just to get back to where we were in 1980. I think we're going to get there, and we're going to surpass that. Personally, I think you might even see us get above 10% of people owning gold and silver, and that won't happen until their traditional assets that they own perform poorly. Right now, there's this false sense of
Mm.
security with their stock portfolio, and they think Nvidia is just going to keep going higher and higher, and Amazon, all these stocks are just going to go higher and higher. But the reality is, I mean, there's a lot of risk in stocks, and I think once people start to see their stock portfolio go down, their bond portfolio go down, and their real estate asset classes go down in price, that's when they'll start really, really looking at ulterior assets such as gold and silver and cryptocurrencies. But we're not there yet. We're not even close to there. Because on the retail level, we're really slow right now. We during COVID, it was really busy for precious metals, but right now we're buying more precious metals from clients than we're selling them, which is really unfortunate. And that will change at some point. But again, not until you see traditional assets perform poorly, which
Yeah, I
hopefully I
mean,
think, I don't know when that's going to happen, but at some point.
yeah, Mike, I think we've seen it as well in our numbers where, and I think the market is, if you looked at the predictions of the gold price this year, it sort of averaged out or hovered around the medians were around $2,300. Um, we've exceeded that. And I think the market is a little bit shell shocked at how well gold is doing. I think they're just making the fatal error because they don't quite understand the asset, that this is not a once off. This is not some random spike. And I think that's why, a deep understanding of gold and its history and political history throughout the world, and ancient civilizations, what happens when currency gets debased. There's a loss of confidence in currency, and then gold corrects, um, and with deficit spending and all of that. um, so we're also seeing clients, there's a slowdown in purchasing. But I think once the market realizes that the gold price is not going anywhere but up, I think there's going to be a shift in the psychology in the market, and then it's going to be really interesting. Um, I think everyone's just, cashing in on their profits at the moment, and it's premature.
And to be honest, it's probably the psychology. I don't think will change until they're spooked out of their current
Mm.
assets. So they need some major event. And I think there is some type of black swan event coming. Who knows what it's
Oh
going to be?
yeah.
Whether it's world war, a cyber attack, a power outage, who knows what it could be? It could be a banking collapse in any part of the world. It doesn't have to happen in the U.S. or Canada. It could start in Europe. I mean, I think once that first big bank goes down, whether it's in Europe or Canada or the U.S., I think it's just going to lead to people starting to panic because that's what happened during COVID. I mean, people got nervous. In Canada, they freeze people's bank accounts. That helped out with donating money. So once people got rattled in that situation, they were like, wow, I really need to take my money out of the bank because I don't trust my government. So until people have a reason to not trust their banks, even though there's plenty of reasons to not trust them now, but the reality is people
Mm,
do trust the banks and they believe in the insurance that is provided by the banks, even though the reality is these insurance companies do not have the money to pay out to all these people if the banks go belly up. There's just no chance of that happening. But there's this false sense of security that your money is safe in a bank. So
mm,
my guess is it will either be a banking crisis or some type of I don't know what, but some type of collapse in the financial system that really
mm.
spooks people. That once people start rushing into precious metals in that situation, I think that'll just change the mindset for people for years to come. I hope I'm right. I hope the situation isn't as bad as I feel like it may be. Because the reality is, I think a lot of people, when this banking crisis happens, I think a lot of people are going to be caught in a bad situation where they just can't get out of it and their money's stuck and they can't get it out. And you're already seeing that across the world. There's many countries around the world where you're limited to $100 a day or $200 a day, and you can't even pull out U.S. dollars. You have to pull out the currency that the country, their currency. So it's a disaster right now in other parts of the world. But I think it's just a matter of time before we see it here in North America. And how about your banking system in South Africa? Maybe touch on that a bit. I'm really curious as to, is that kind of stable right now? And if so, how is that possible?
Yeah, I chuckle to myself, Mike, because when you refer to the rest of the world, that South Africa forms very squarely in that category. Um, I think our banking system, I think you have to look at South Africa as a whole. Um, you know, our infrastructure is failing here. I mean, if you have to look at, or maybe take a step back, if you look at Africa as a continent, um, and you look at one of the the breadbasket of Africa being Zimbabwe, we don't need to know where South Africa is going.
That's
It is heading towards that if there is not serious policy change here. And we're seeing it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, our unemployment rate is at an all-time high. Um, I can't quote the figures to you, but I think it's definitely between 35 and 45%. The youth unemployment is extremely high. You have failing medical infrastructure. Um, our basic utilities. I mean, we had a chat a while ago, and we just came out of a couple of weeks where we didn't have water for a solid week. Granted, they were finally doing maintenance for the first time in 30 years. But the 2 weeks prior to that, there was intermittent water. We have had something called load shedding in South Africa since 2015, which is basically they shed the grid of load. So you have scheduled blackouts. Um, since the elections, which we're all thinking we're in the honeymoon phase of our newly elected government, that load shedding is a thing of the past. There is most likely, we've probably been bailed out by China or Russia, where we have state-owned enterprises that are all failing. So when it comes to the banking system, one is not hopeful, but the banking system itself is actually relatively good in terms of security. I think South Africa has a really progressed. Something that always surprises me when I travel to the US is that people still use checkbooks. Your card gets cloned on the regular. Every time I've gone to the US, my cards get cloned, and that's something that is really it doesn't. So that doesn't happen here. But that's pretty much all I can say for our system here. I think we have a very austere central bank here, but the problem is that the production is not there. Your central bank can control inflation all they want. If your production is not there, your economic growth is not there, um, and our socio-economic policies here are getting more and more extortionist. Um, it doesn't look good for South Africa. Um, and that's not even going into the social problems like crime and poverty. It's going to get worse, and I think the next 10 years are going to be very telling. I think South Africa is on a downward trajectory, and unfortunately I think it's going to, I don't know if a civil war is on the rise here. There are serious there've always been racial undercurrents, and I don't think that's necessarily because of racism. It's because it's fed by policies in the private sector and in the public sector of the age-old thing, divide and conquer. And when people are struggling to feed their families, they can look for anyone to blame. So I think from a financial standpoint and from a growth standpoint, South Africa is still a huge exporter of basically raw materials, commodities, that type of thing, and that's our saving grace. We still
you guys
have
are rich.
really,
You guys are rich in natural resources, are you not? In South
yeah,
Africa, you are.
yeah, very.
I mean, the general rule of thumb is usually people should be successful because of these natural resources, but it never seems to be the case for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at Singapore to know that you don't need to necessarily, you just need really good trade policies. You need a free market. I don't know if Singapore is as free as they used to be. We had an entity there at a time, and it's become extremely difficult to do business in Singapore compared to, 5, 10 years ago. Um,
Right.
but you don't need natural resources to be rich, and you would think that that is sort of intuitive. But South Africa, I mean, Zimbabwe was an incredible farming country. They had incredible exports. And look at it now. I mean, they're basically dependent on the dollar. I mean, it's very sad to see
So being,
what's
so
happening
being
in
so
the
close to this, the Zimbabwe situation by being in South Africa, are the people of South Africa, are they more awake and non-trusting of government and banks? Are they more close? Like, are they more likely to own precious metals, for example? Are they more looking to have assets outside of the system? What's kind of the general mindset of the people over in South Africa?
I think the general mindset of the public is no one trusts the government. You know, South Africans have an incredible sense of humor. Sometimes it verges on too dark because I think we've been so used to being overpromised to and underdelivered to. So your general public is definitely extremely distrustful of the government. You have a lot of people holding on to Krugerrands, particularly the farming community, where they're sort of storing Krugerrands in the legs of their beds, and just waiting for the crash to come.
Right.
I think, something that has also bred a lot of distrust. South Africa, its political history, it's understandable that there's distrust from both sides. I mean, pre freedom or pre 1994, um, it was tough. It was really tough for a lot of people. Yeah, so I think people here are extremely distrustful, and I think even your middle class, your poor class, your lower socioeconomic class are really struggling. I mean, they're not getting basic services. As I said, the state medical system is failing. Um, it's very sad to see what they have to put up with. I don't think I can tell you some stories. My brother is he is a doctor, so he recently qualified. He's now doing his residency in Vanderbilt in Tennessee because there are literally no specialization posts uh, in South Africa. Not for anyone. They've mismanaged the funds. They've embezzled money. They can't pay their doctors. They can train them for free. They don't get
Wow.
paid. So
Wow.
that does not bode well for a society where you're going to have this massive vacuum, where basic services like running water, electricity, medical care is going to start getting put under pressure. And that's what happens when you have a tax base as small as ours supporting such a big population that is not paying tax. Um,
Hmm.
so it's going to be an interesting time. I think there's a lot of potential in South Africa. As you said, there's it's very resource rich, but that those resources, it depends on policy, how those are going to be extracted, and reinvested into the country.
So are you looking to potentially look at other places in the world to potentially move? If you're so, I guess, lack of positivity on the future of South Africa, are you looking to move your family?
Oh yes, I'm about to move to the US. So yeah, so those works are already, those wheels are in motion.
Oh, good for you.
I think South Africa, I sound very negative. I think we're all just extremely frustrated here at how nothing is changing. It is a typical African government that basically the fat cats that sit at the top just raid the coffers until for next 4 years, and then in come the next round. Um, and there's still a lot of potential here, but it's going to have to rock bottom. We haven't even seen that yet.
Right.
And it's going to take a good 10 to 15 years, in my opinion, before that corrects.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about. Just have a few minutes left. Just kind of what's next for Nebu. I'm very curious. I mean, I'm really super excited about your brand. We're looking to carry it in our store and on our online stores as well. So maybe tell me a little bit about what's next for your company and how you kind of envision the growth in the coming years.
Mike, as I said, we bootstrapped the company, we've grown it organically, and we're ready for our next phase of growth. So we are about to do a US expansion um, that should happen early next year, where we're going to get physical presence in the United States to better service our client base there and to service Canada, and to really just be in a deep capital market. Um,
Now, when you say presence in the United States, do you mean at a retail level or at a wholesale level?
we'll probably still be for the first year at a wholesale level and then maybe look at retail space. Um, so that's the next phase. I think we're growing pretty nicely year on year. I think we're doing about on average 220%. And that we need to continue for the next 3 to 5 years at least, if not higher. So we're growing our team. We're going to start expanding into other sales channels. We're going to distribute through Amazon and Walmart next year,
Nice.
and obviously partner with Can-Am and other bullion dealers, and expand our geographical presence. Um, that's pretty much our 2 to 3 year plan at the moment. I think sometimes one has grand plans, 10xing your business in the next 5 years and all of that. But I think given the circumstances and the environment at the moment, sometimes, one doesn't quite know how to plan for that. So I think, we're just sticking to sound principles, and sticking to the basics,
Sure.
where we're just trying to get as much physical gold that people can wear and transport with them into the consumer's hands as possible.
So curious, you said India is like the biggest market for wearing. One third of all gold is being worn by Indian women. Have you tapped into that market yet? Is that doable, the Indian market, for you to enter? Because it seems like that would be a perfect market for your business.
We are looking at, I mean, so your big gold markets, look, the United States is, I think, the third biggest gold consumer in the world, um, preceded by China and India. So the East in general is an incredible market. And that market, stores or buys predominantly wearable gold. The West is more dominated by coins and bullion or bars. The East is more wearable. I think they just have a history of persecution and wanting and not trusting their government. So there's a cultural. It's very cultural there. We've looked at penetrating. So we're expanding into the Middle East at the moment. The Indian and Asian market is pretty saturated. There's some very, very, very big companies that are doing very similar work to what we are, but
Gotcha.
at the same time, they are predominantly focusing on 22 carat. It's a
Mm,
very different type of gold product to what, I mean, you'll see our products. What you think gold looks like, pure gold, that's what it looks like. When you go to the East, the jewelry is almost yellow,
yeah.
and they treat the gold there differently.
I did notice that about your jewelry. It's more of an orangey color, just more gold, right? And it's not traditionally what you see from jewelry. So I mean, that's a pretty cool statement piece in itself, right?
Yeah, I think gold. Our gold should look gold.
Right.
Um, Whereas in the East, it's extreme. There's because it's such a big cultural. I mean, wedding gifts are gold. When you're giving somebody a christening gift, it's gold. Dowries are physical gold. So it's. But that said, it is a very specific type of design, and it is definitely a market that we want to penetrate because we think that we're bringing a more modern slant on something that is you can wear every day. It's a little bit more minimalistic. It's not ceremonial in nature, and more importantly, it's 24 carat, um, not 22. So you know, depending on where you are in Asia, you'll get 4 nines. I mean, that's obviously the best, being 24 carat. But yeah, it's definitely a market that we are going to be investigating. But I think there's a lot of work to be done in the US and Canada, but it's definitely on our horizon.
Awesome, awesome. Um, so how can people learn more about Nebu Gold and um, the website is nebugold.com. Is that correct? Is there any
Yes.
other places to kind of look at your business and find out more about what you guys do, or is that the spot to go to?
Yeah, I think that's the main spot. We obviously on our website you'll see who we're partnered with. So we distribute throughout the US through our partnerships, and that you'll have instant gratification through their next day delivery. Um, we have obviously our various social platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, but all the information is on our website, and that's where you can find and browse and learn about the story.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll also be carrying your product here at Can-Am Currency. So we will have some of the items that you guys carry. We will be selling in our physical store. Obviously, the whole selection we'd like to sell on our online store as well. So more to come on that. But Helen, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. We'll be speaking obviously more in the future, and I'd love to have you back on the podcast. I'm a big fan of you and your business, and nothing but great success to you in the future.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's been a real pleasure, and I really look forward to doing more with Can-Am.
Awesome. Thanks again, Helen. We'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. Have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.